In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace the front brakes on this Dodge Ram 2500. Let's get started. Use a 24mm socket and remove all 8 of your lug nuts. If your vehicle has a cover here, well, you're going to want to pull that off first. Mine does not, so I'm just going to remove all these and then take the wheel off. Next, from the back side of the caliper, we're going to want to remove the two 10mm bolts that hold the caliper onto the bracket. These can be a little tight, so grab a long wrench or a ratchet with a little bit of leverage. Once you break them free, they should come off fairly easily. And the bolt goes all the way through the slider of the caliper. That's what it looks like. Do the same on the bottom one. Take that off completely. You might need a pry bar to pry the caliper off. Pry it off of the bottom first. Once you do, you can flip it open like this, and you do not want to let it hang by the brake hose. So you're going to want to put it up on top of the knuckle, just like so that it doesn't pull on the brake hose and, of course, the ABS wire. Pay attention to that. At this point, you can remove your pads. You may need a little pry bar or flathead screwdriver to help you out. These ones aren't too stuck. If you don't slide them straight out, they actually kind of get jammed up top and at the bottom here, so you have to make sure you keep the pad moving evenly. There it is. Set those aside. Use an 18mm socket to remove the 2 bolts that hold the caliper bracket onto the front axle. So I am able to fit my air impact in here. If you need to fit a larger tool, you can unhook the ABS wire. If not, just do it by hand with a breaker bar. Okay, there we go. Okay, I'm going to leave this in a few threads. Oops, not that much. Just enough to hold the caliper bracket while I take off the top. I did have to add some heat to it. Not very common. These should not be that stuck. At this point, once it's broken free, just remove it. At this point, you can also remove the bottom bolt, or whichever one you did first, and left on a few threads. And with that out, you should be able to remove not just the bolt, but also the caliper bracket. Now you can remove your rotor. If it's stuck on from rust buildup, you can either hit the backside or just hit it right in between the lug studs. That should break it free. At this point, you'd want to clean up the hub surface with a wire brush, or if it's in really poor condition, you'd want to sand it down a little bit, but not too much. Keep it nice and flat. Make sure you remove all raised areas that are rusty, any debris that's on it. And if it already has grease or anti-seize, remove that as well. We want to start with a clean, flat surface so that the new rotor has a, well, flat surface to mount on. Otherwise, it might cause braking issues down the line. It doesn't have to look perfect, it just has to be nice and flat. Rinse it down with some brake parts cleaner when you're done cleaning it, just to make sure you get any old oils and other debris from cleaning it off of it. Wait for it to dry, and then we will apply an anti-corrosive coating. I like to use high temperature anti-seize. Use whatever else you have that isn't going to completely melt off of here as this heats up. You don't need a lot, just enough to cover this surface here. If you put too much on, it'll run down, and try to avoid getting it on the threads of the lug studs. If you do, no big deal. Just take a rag and wipe it off. There we go. I'm going to put this rotor on backwards so it can be held on here. I'm going to clean the braking surface with some brake parts cleaner and a clean rag. there are oils on it, and you need to get those off before the pads touch the rotor. Rinse that down and dry it off with a clean rag. Flip it over, and we'll do the same on the other side. Install the rotor. And to avoid it falling off like this, I'm going to use a lug nut and thread it on all the way. This is going to hold the rotor in place so it doesn't keep flopping around as I install the caliper. Let's clean up the old caliper bracket. When you get your new anti-rattle clips, you're going to want to pay attention to which one goes where. So before you take the old ones off, take note of this. They are different. As you can see, one has a center tab that's flat and even with the other ones. However, the other one, which in this case sits on the bottom, has a shorter tab that sticks straight out. So you're going to want to put them back the same way they came apart. As you can see, that is this one, and the other one has the 3 flat tabs. So remove these, we're going to discard them. We're going to clean underneath. Hopefully you don't have a lot of severe rust buildup. Mine is rusty, but it's not rotted to pieces, so it is okay to reuse if yours is in horrible shape or someone has sanded off way too much. You're going to have to replace this, or these won't stay on. You'll have problems with the pads sitting there. So what I'm going to do, spray a little brake parts cleaner. This should cut down on the dust, and scrape it off with a wire brush. If you have a lot of rot buildup and you need to sand it down, watch out how much you sand, because if you remove too much material, like I said, these won't stay on. This coating looks like it's chipping away. If that's the case for you, try to remove as much of the loose coating as possible. If not all of it comes off, that's okay. But the pieces that are flaking away, try to scrape them off. And of course, clean on the inside here as well. Once you're done, rinse it all off. With it dry, apply a thin layer of either brake grease or brake-rated silicone paste. That's what I'm using. It's rated for high temperatures. Whatever you're using, you want to make sure it's not going to melt as the brakes heat up and operate. And you don't want to put too much, because if you do, it'll squeeze out, get onto the rotor. That's not a good thing. But you do want to coat it so that it doesn't rust in the future. If it rusts, it'll swell up. The pads will get stuck in between the top and the bottom clips here. So once you're done with that, take your clip, slide it on. This slides on no problem. If you have to hammer it on, it's probably too rusty and it's swollen and you need to clean up more. If it falls on and falls right off, that's too much. If it just goes on and falls right off, there's not enough material here and you're going to have to replace the caliper bracket. At this point, we're going to do the same to the other side. This side already fell off for me earlier, so I'm just going to clean it up and install the new clip. Make sure you have the right one. There should be 2 of each, because one set goes on one side, one set goes on the other side. Bottom it out all the way, and this caliper bracket is ready to be put back on the truck. The slider pins are actually built into the caliper on this particular application, so it's not as easy to clean them just because you have to be here stuck next to the truck, but slide them out. They should have this boot around them. Inspect the boot. So a lot of times they get swollen or torn, in which case these have to be replaced, and hopefully your slider pins are not seized in there. This one isn't seized, but it's getting stuck on the boot here, so I'm just gonna, there we go. Keep pushing it with a little tool. Once you take it out, inspect it. If it's very rusty, you're gonna wanna replace it, as well as the boot. Most likely there's a tear in it or water got in. This one's in okay condition. I'm just gonna wire brush the ends here where the boot seals up. Other than that, the grease is fine in there. I'm just going to add more grease. I won't grease the slider pin that much because it's a tight fit, so as I slide it in, it's all going to get wiped off. But I will put all of my grease in here. These folds are going to hold the grease just as a reserve for well, as the brakes operate, basically. So stick your brush with either high temperature silicone paste or brake grease in here. You can't really put too much. Try not to waste it, but if you put too much, it's actually just going to get pushed out the other side. So basically, don't worry about overdoing it, other than the fact that it's going to waste. I cleaned up the pin in a wire wheel. If you have a wire wheel on a drill, that works very well. If you have a wire brush, that should also do the job. I'm going to apply a little bit of silicone paste on here just to help it slide through, but like I said, most of it is going to get wiped off as it actually goes through. Put it in the caliper, press it on all the way. You'll see that the boot wants to seat in that cutout. That's normal, that's what you want. And same on the other side, all the excess grease is going to come out. Push the boot over, make sure it's sealed up and it slides nice and smooth. Work it back and forth a few times to get that grease all over inside. Wipe off the excess, and once you're done with one, do the same to the other one. Perfect. Let's compress the pistons so the new thicker pads can fit. Use an old pad as a spacer, and whatever style tool you have, whether it's this pump style or the screw style, anything else, ratcheting style, doesn't matter. Slowly press the pistons back in. If it takes a lot of force to press them in, that means they're seized up and you need a new caliper. You should be able to very slowly, with minimal force, press them in. Just going to go all the way until they bottom out. That's it. They're not going to be flush. You'll just feel when the tool bottoms out completely. Remove the pads, or the old pad, and your tool. Get the caliper bracket over the front axle and over the rotor. Have your bolts ready and start them in. I cleaned up the threads on these, and you can put a little bit of anti-seize if yours are very stuck like mine were on the part that doesn't thread in. On the threads that contact the caliper bracket, I recommend thread locker or just leave them as is. Bottom these out. The torque for both of these bolts is 250 foot-pounds. There's one. And two. When you put the pads on, make sure the inner pad gets a wear indicator. In this case, it goes on the top. Might have to pull this tab out so that the spring doesn't hold you back. Do the same on the outer one. There we go. Make sure these pads can slide smoothly in here. If they're completely stuck and you had to use, let's say, a hammer to put them in, you definitely did not clean the bracket enough and they're basically jammed in here, that'll cause braking issues. Let's put the caliper on. Make sure these pins are slid back as far as they can go, otherwise it'll interfere with you putting it on here. And then at the top, you'll see that it has this tab, this hook that sticks out in the middle. Put the top in first and hook it in, and then slide the bottom on like this. Once you have it on, you're going to have to hold it, and let's put the bolts in. Get these bolts in and started by hand. You want to make sure they thread in. This one's started. Do the same on the bottom. I'm gonna have to move the caliper around a little bit to get these started. There we go. Snug these up. When you tighten them, make sure you don't over tighten them before you actually torque them, because the torque is very low. It's 24 foot-pounds, so just snug them up with a wrench or whatever you're using. And now, once again, 24 foot-pounds. That's it. With the brakes done, go ahead and do the same to the other side. Always do both sides at the same time. Pump up the brake pedal, and let's put the wheels on. At this point, you can remove this lug nut that you put on for safety. And let's get the wheel on. Press it on all the way. Install all 8 of your lug nuts in a cross pattern, bottom them out, and then also in a cross pattern, torque them to 140 foot-pounds. Let's torque these lug nuts to 140 foot-pounds in a cross pattern. Double check them if you want. At this point, if your wheel had the lug nut cover, snap it back on. It just clips on. If not, there you have it.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.